Hey everybody, welcome back for Art Camp 3 Week 3 critique. Thank you so much for being patient with me and for our little gap there, as well as our extra day. I am just getting back from my honeymoon and I am super jet lagged. Going east is awful. So I'm a complete mess right now. I actually woke up last night and sort of didn't go back to bed, and so I've actually been up for a while. So yeah, if I like pass out at any point during the stream, it's totally not my fault. To make matters worse, my hand is in a nice brace now, so I can still paint. I don't think it has anything to do with RSI, but it's still in a brace. So yeah, with all those excuses, I think we'll have a good critique today. Because we're talking about rocks and trees, my favorite things ever, because they're the best. We're gonna go over all your stuff that you sent in. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. You guys did a great job, and cover all the stuff to do even better. I'd say that probably the things that I'll be harping on everyone about this week is perspective and form, because those are the two big clinchers that differentiate the different qualities, shall we say. Not good and bad, but different qualities. Even if something's good, it can be made better by better perspective, better form. And so yeah, those are probably the two high points that you will hear me rant on and on and on about today. But we're gonna go ahead and dive right in. Let's see here. All right, so hopefully you guys can see all that. And yeah, I will be slurping on coffee throughout this stream because otherwise Noah is definitely going to pass out. So yeah, with that said, we're just going to get in here and start going over stuff. So these look good. This is off to a good start right here. There's a good sense of form. There's a good studying of the values, good sense of lighting even. Yeah, I feel pretty good about these. The reference studies are pretty solid. I'd say that the biggest weakness I'm seeing is in terms of the foliage that you studied. Did a pretty good job of getting the tree trunk here, but less of a good job when it came to studying the foliage. That's partly because foliage is really, really hard, so I don't really blame you. But you're sort of missing out on a sense of the volume of this tree. Again, like thinking about giant spheres and thinking about these big clumps that are in three-dimensional space, they sort of seem to flatten out a bit as you get into yours. And sometimes that requires a bit of stylizing almost to push some clumps back, to bring some others forward, so that we can better communicate what the form is of that. Same goes for the perspective. Again, you're trying to push this kind of spherical look to this thing, where these are three-dimensional forms. So you're going to have to indicate in your groupings of light and dark that there is that perspective going. So again, looking up at these top forms, making sure that they're nice, kind of shallow angles, and just seeing the glimpse of the top of these things to try to get a better feel for how those three-dimensional forms work. Foliage is certainly one that I imagine most people struggled with, because most people do struggle with it. It's certainly a good one to struggle with. You're not alone when you do. It's a very difficult subject. When you start looking at old masters who have done foliage, it's honestly a pretty mixed bag of quality. There's a lot of people that aren't terribly good at foliage. It's a tricky one to get right. It's tricky to balance the right amount of detail and perspective and color and form and all the other stuff going on, and still make it an interesting tree at the end of the day. It's a tough one. Yeah, I think just a few hits here and there to accentuate the sort of three-dimensional aspect of this is kind of what you're looking for here. Now your study looks quite good. These tree trunks are super sweet, particularly in the shadow area. I think they weaken a little bit here in the light. They don't have quite the same amount of form that I think they should. There's kind of an opportunity to use a little bit more form where the light's hitting it. Form is generally revealed on the edge of the light and the shadow. So usually where you've got that line where it stops, where the light stops, the shadow begins, or vice versa, that's where you can put in a few extra brush strokes and start to imply a little bit more about what's going on with the form, what sort of bark texture we've got going on here. Kind of all the fun stuff you're doing in here, you can bring out a little bit of that just there, even on the edge of those forms. The rocks look pretty good. Yeah, overall pretty solid. As you got into your kind of mountainous background here, though, you did flatten out a little bit. I don't quite get the same sense of 3 dimensions that when I look at this, I get. This has super strong sense of 3-dimensional form, and that's what we want. Even though this is, way bigger scale, it's the exact same idea. And so if you can map things out as much as you can in this sort of way, even when you're dealing with the big scale stuff, will really help. I mean, obviously we haven't really gotten to talking about mountains. That's sort of the next one. It's still worth mentioning now that basically the same principles would apply for forms like these as when you're doing these foreground rocks. Overall, I think this looks really good. Again, I think it does sort of suffer the fact that in your study there wasn't as strong of a sense of 3-dimensional form as you could get, and same goes for perspective. And I'm not quite getting the sense that I'm really looking up at these top forms as I think I could. I think there could just be a few more indications to kind of show us that form. And that can have to do with the overlapping of these spherical abstractions we're using. Obviously, there's not actual spheres going on, especially in our reference, but that tends to be a useful abstraction to get us going in the right direction so that we can better portray what we're looking at. But overall, really nicely done. I like what you've done here. Good. Right. Looks sweet. Really nice colors. Very, very nice work with the colors. Studies look quite good. They're not super finished, which you may kind of shoot yourself in the foot with as far as like the branches go, the branching patterns and stuff, because as you render it out, you may find that you're missing a little bit of information, but it's a thought. But overall, really nicely studied, quite nice work. I think the thing that is first popping out to me is the perspective feels a little bit weak. I think actually as it comes to the ground plane here, I don't have quite the same feel of the ground sitting there as I think I do in your studies even. This sort of rock bow, I think, is actually mainly what's throwing it off. They don't feel quite in the same world as everything else. Yeah, I think the fact that you were trying to kind of interpret these forms into here meant that you had to do a lot more of your own personal approach to things, and I think they got a little bit off in perspective. So, yeah. Not exactly what it is here. Yeah, I think they're just not quite receding correctly for perspective you've got set up here. They both feel too far away and not integrated into this. The fact that none of the shadows are overlapping, the fact that this sort of sand stuff isn't affecting them at all, isn't coming into it, just kind of means that they're sort of set apart, which is something that's worth thinking about, because when you're taking effectively, these elements and kind of squishing them into an image, you've got to learn how to integrate all these different elements that you're learning into a cohesive whole. And that does mean learning how to take these principles and apply them. Thus the name Applied Studies. Yeah, I think just bringing in almost some of the sand here and stuff, trying to integrate some of that, and then just making sure that your perspective is in line with everything, I think would help a lot. I do like what you've done with the tree trunk here. It works quite well. I'd like to see, one nice thing I like about this is the little bit of dappled light effect that you get here. And I'd kind of like to see you just take advantage of that and put in a couple little hits of dappled light. All of a sudden, it will just help it feel like there's light filtering through this stuff, and less like it's sort of pasted on there. You don't want your shadows to feel too dense, especially when they're coming through trees. You want to have those spots where there are little shadows and holes in the shadows, so that you get this nice little effect to it. It just makes it feel a lot brighter, more alive, and makes for an interesting design choices that you can add in there. You can do a lot with the dappled light. You can pretty much put it wherever you want, which is great because it lets you kind of highlight certain aspects and stuff. You might try to incorporate some more of that. But overall, nicely done. Good senses of form, really nice color. I like what you're doing here. But do pay attention to perspective. Overall, your perspective is just feeling a little bit soft throughout it. It doesn't quite have a cohesive sense of perspective. Looking good. Take a quick look. Right. These look good. I think my main thing for you is that I think I'm missing out on just a little bit of the three-dimensional form. That's the main thing I'm seeing here. It feels like some of your rocks are a bit too cut out in a sense, and they don't quite have the sense of dimensionality to them. I'm trying to figure out exactly why that is. Part of it is your values here. Your values are a little too contrasty, and the rocks don't really feel integrated into this world. And that's partly because, yeah, it's partly because in your studies you actually kind of left out some of the things that did integrate them. So in this piece that I know a lot of people studied this week, you didn't really get a lot of opportunity to see how rocks sort of go into one another. A lot of it's sort of overlapping forms and stuff, and you don't really see how to show this part of it, how to show this part where it's kind of on its own and interacting with the ground and the background and stuff, to really make it sit properly in a 3D space. A lot of this is just so zoomed in that you don't really get that sense of it. They're very solid rocks, but you don't get the benefit of, okay, now that it's actually touching the ground, what happens? So that's something that you could benefit from looking at this one a little closer, of just how these leaves and stuff like that are integrating into this scene. because actually those sort of elements have a huge effect on making sure that everything is sitting correctly. And even though that's maybe not the point of the study, the point of the study is to do good rocks. Part of the applied study is being able to integrate it properly into a scene. Another thing is, I think your values are actually a little too tentative. You're going from kind of a fairly light dark color for their shadows into just this super, super deep dark black color with not really much in between there. And it doesn't quite read, I think, the way you want it to. So almost add in a couple shadowed rocks in here. You're not going to get quite that sense of in there. And this lets you use that dark color a little bit more sparingly. And just to mention while I'm doing this, if you guys do have any questions whatsoever, just let me know here in the chat. I am taking a look at it. So anything you're curious about or confused about or anything like that, just say the word and see if I can do my best to explain that. The other thing I'm seeing here that's making your rock forms a little bit weaker than they should is a few too many concave forms on the outside of their silhouettes. And I know that's very specific, but I believe I mentioned in the landscape painting pitfalls video that hopefully you all watched that nature tends to have convex forms, not concave forms. Obviously, rocks can be a huge exception to that because wind and sand and water can sort of wear them down in interesting patterns that can make them a little bit more concave, but it is the exception to the rule. By and large, you're going to see mostly convex forms, and you can see that in Eitan's piece here that almost all of the forms on the rocks, pretty much everywhere, even where he's got some pretty funky patterns going on here, most of the time they are convex forms, not concave. Same goes for this other one. I think it's obviously super low resolution, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. It's very, very, very rare to get concave forms, and that's part of what I think is actually making your rocks feel a little bit too pasted on, is that they don't feel natural enough because they don't have those natural curves we're sort of used to seeing. So if you just kind of take it and kind of add those forms back in, make them a little bit more convex. It can often just be a case of rounding out some of the forms. Sometimes that's all it takes to make it feel a little bit more natural, chiseling away at them. Because you got to realize that nature does chisel away at them. It does tend to sculpt them a little bit. That wind and rain tends to smooth things out like that. So it'll feel a little bit more natural, a little bit less alien. It's not. This stuff is looking good. I'm just gonna rant because I personally hate Rococo art, which is the style of this stuff. You're more than welcome to study it. That's a personal taste on my part. You did a good job studying it. I just happen to hate Rococo. I think it's terrible. But again, my opinion. As far as this goes, I think the thing I'm seeing here is that your perspective, of course, I said there's only two things I'm going to talk about today. Your perspective is really extreme on the tree, which is great. It's got this, strong sense of really receding up and then really receding down. The problem is that the rest of the environment doesn't really conform to that. Basically, you're almost looking at this tree with a super wide angle lens, which means that as you get further and further down, you're going to get more and more extreme perspective. Which means rather than having this kind of almost normal conservative sort of viewpoint on this foreground, you're going to have this crazy foreground where these rocks are receding like a ton, and you're almost looking like straight down at the ones at the bottom because the perspective is so extreme here. So rather than having this kind of normal perspective, you're going to get a lot more dramatic if you're going to keep this sort of perspective on the tree. Same goes for the sky. You're going to want to get a sense that you're really looking up at it. So as we get into talking about clouds and skies, you're really going to want to see the bottom of a lot of clouds. So just make sure that as you're doing your stuff, you're integrating a similar perspective on everything. You did a good job studying the perspective here, which again is that sort of effect that you're getting. It's that extreme kind of fisheye lens where you're really looking, up at the top of it and really looking down at the bottom of it. It's something you'll see in a lot of landscape photography, and being able to spot it is quite important. It's the exact opposite of what Eitan did in his piece here. This piece is really, really telephoto perspective. There's no sense of fisheye going on at all. You can almost imagine that you're zoomed in on this guy with like a really telephoto lens. And so everything kind of almost flattens out perspective-wise. You're looking at everything from a similar perspective rather than this photo that is really extreme. You can really tell what you're looking down at and what you're looking up at. And you're getting the extremes of both ends of that. So that's an important thing to recognize as you go into your applied stuff, is making sure that you're adhering to those perspective rules. I gotta say, I really like this one. I don't really have a lot to add to it. I think you did a great job with this. It's super adorable and nicely done. For what it is, it's very cool. I like it. So yeah, just a few things, but you're definitely on the right track here. Okay, some more coffee. All right, these are looking good. It seems to me, my initial impression of all these is that you're just a little bit too tentative with your values mainly, and that's not a huge problem. When you're doing studies, you can obviously keep them pretty muted, but part of what you're looking to study is also the sense of light, and you can't quite capture the sense of light if you're not utilizing the correct value range. That is to say, a value range that's enough to really communicate, bright sunlight, for instance. So as we've talked about before, it's honestly a case of, rather than doing a whole piece like this, coming back in and adding just a few indications of dark values in here. It's those darkest darks where they're getting really into these crevices. And then also on the flip side, making sure that you've got a little bit further on the light side of your value range. And it might seem like a little bit of a nitpicky thing, but it is a quite important aspect to what we're studying, because we're not just studying the forms in an abstract sense. We're also studying the way that light affects these forms, and making sure that you've got the correct value ranges to adequately express that is pretty important. So just a little thought there. I mean, just those few brushstrokes was enough to make that pop. And the same thing could happen to pretty much all of these. You've got a little bit more value range than I think you're using. and a few darks and a few lights here and there is about all it needs. Same goes for something like this. Just a few darks to really make these tree trunks pop, and suddenly you're going to have a lot more depth in this and a lot more form. So it's not going to take much. You don't want to overdo it. You don't need to go super high contrasty everywhere, but just a few here and there, and I think you'll be pretty pleased with what happens. Because overall, I think you've done a quite nice job studying the forms. I think the one thing I'm seeing that's sort of lacking is, for one thing, your trees. You studied it well in the references, but in the imaginative stuff, you sort of forgot the background planes of leaves. It feels like these all are sort of in front of this tree trunk, and you kind of miss out on some of the ones that seem to be behind it. And whether that's a case of you need to group your values differently to make it seem like, okay, I'm going to make this grouping right here feel like it's behind this other one. And then, I'm going to add some down here that are clearly behind everything. It's a pretty easy one to forget about because you usually do a pretty good job of ignoring those things. But it's also really helpful for getting that extra sense of depth to trees, where they don't feel like pasted on trees. They don't feel like the cheap video game trees that are like actually 2D planes. You want to have that sense of it's a whole round object, and there's lots of stuff happening even back here. And again, that can be just a case of adding a little bit more background tree nonsense. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a little bit to show that, yes, this thing is wrapping all the way around. Yes, this is a three-dimensional object. And these rocks are way too mushy. They're just so mushy. Why are they mushy? You did a good job with your other ones. They feel pretty solid, but I think it was the problem that this study is not super solid. Part of it is that you got a little bit confused with some of the local values here. All the whatever moss or lichen that is growing on this throws off all your values, which can be a little bit confusing as you're studying it, because you start to confuse some of the lights and darks, and then it kind of flattens out a little bit. And then when you go on to do something like this, you flatten out just a little bit. And part of it is just make a few more confident strokes, a little bit less soft edges. Soft edges and rocks rarely get along. Sometimes they do, but very, very rarely. And also, of course, as I said with the other stuff, a little bit more value range here. But overall, they sort of feel like play sort of dough ball kind of things rather than solid dimensional rocks. And part of that is you just need to be making some more clear, obvious decisions. This isn't a time to be, loose, ethereal painter. This is the time, at least while you're studying, to be really, really confident with these decisions, even if you're making terrible decisions, because then you can at least fix those. So. Do some super hard edges and make some choices and get in there and do them. They can be rounded out rocks. There's nothing wrong with rounded out, but you have to be confident about your rounded out rocks. All right, these look good. Good sense of light, good sense of color. Really like these down at the bottom here. It's super sweet. I like what you've done with this giant one here. It's super cool. Let's see here. I think this is probably the weak spot for you that I'm not getting super good sense of what's happening there, because I think a few of the values, or maybe the lighting is getting off a little bit, um, causing it to not make quite as much sense. Maybe it's that you kind of stopped doing your selective darks in an odd place, meaning that some of your rocks started to kind of flatten out here. Yeah, I think that might really be it. And maybe a little bit too much contrast in your shadow areas, meaning that they're drawing the eye a little bit too much, whereas your lights aren't grouped as much. Yeah, I think it's that your lights and darks are getting a little too muddied up, and it's not super clear which is which. And to be fair, you've got some rocks here that sort of do have some very rounded forms, and it can be a little bit unclear what's happening. But again, that's a case where we're making decisions to better accentuate what we're seeing. We're not copying directly ever when we're painting landscapes or environments or anything. We're always interpreting things. So we're interpreting to better explain what we're showing. We're interpreting to better express the form. And there are ways that we can exaggerate and ways that we can tone down things to better do that. So even if there might be lots of contrast in the light, for instance, lots of lights and darks going back and forth, maybe you want to actually simplify that just a little bit to accentuate the sense of form. And then for your applied study, you didn't really get too far into the rocks, so I can't really tell, but I think they're off to a good start. What you have done here is quite good. And what you've done so far with the tree is also quite good. I'd probably just say just push a little bit further than what you're doing, just to make absolutely certain that you're getting the principle of it all. Because these studies are looking good. I really like this one. It's strong. For this one, you got a little bit off in the perspective. Again, you did the little fisheye thing a bit too much, which means that the scale of the tree got off a little bit, because it means that it looks a little bit too much like you're right next to it. Whereas you want that camera angle of getting away from it. I'd also always take a little bit extra time studying how trees enter the ground. It's a part that trips a lot of people, and partly because it's kind of confusing and it changes a lot, but is incredibly important. When people look at things, they tend to look at where they're interacting with something else. So when you're doing this stuff, pay extra attention to how things are overlapping or how things are meeting the ground. So understanding how a rock sits on the ground or how a tree enters the ground is super, super important, because otherwise they'll be kind of floaty and weird or mushy or something like that, or you'll just have to cover them up forever. And you don't want to have to do that. So yeah, overall really nice though. Like what you're doing here. All right, well, these are some rocks. Great. Yeah, hell yeah. Look really, really good. I'm not going to have too much to say about these, because I do think these look pretty solid. I might, nah, never mind. I was going to say something, but no, I'm not. I don't have too much to say. You've done a good job stylizing things. Like this is nicely interpreted from this. It's exactly what we're really talking about doing, in that you did not, in fact, copy the values or the forms exactly. You sort of interpreted things to better show things off. The only thing I might say is when you're doing these, try to include just a little bit of indication of the ground or the things around it, because being able to make these rocks sit into environments and make sure that they are incorporated in the same perspective as everything else is really, really important. And if you're just sort of doing these silhouetted studies, you don't get quite the full benefit. Also, I don't know exactly what happened with this one, but for some reason it's quite a bit weaker than the rest, and the perspective doesn't make a whole lot of sense as it stands. And also those shadows and the lights are getting a little bit muddied up here. You've got some lights kind of trickling down into your darks. I don't know whether that's a rock with a lot of speculars on it, a lot of specular highlights. I'm not sure, but the only other thing I would say is that you've got a number of kind of weird protrusions to your silhouettes that do feel a little bit too sharp in places. Obviously, when a rock has been split, you can get some of those concave forms that we talked about, but it is a rarity. And so when you're doing a form like this, like right here, rather than drawing a line that's kind of like this, like, got a little concave there, try to look at it as best you can as two convex forms. It's not always the case, and this is not a hard and fast rule, but I would say that by and large, nature is going to tend to make forms like this. And you're going to get these sharp forms that are very concave when something's broken off, or some very weird patterning and stuff is happening from wind and rain again. But generally, look to do more overlapping convex forms. You've got a number of sharp angles kind of jutting out in places, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's just it tends to not be the way things work, and you might take a closer look at those. So, but overall, really, really nicely done. I like what you've got here. Oh, I just realized that my chat was not uploading to my phone. So just taking a quick look and making sure nobody asked me a question. Oh, we did get a question a while ago. Would you say it's a problem if the abstracted circle forms of foliage are mostly similar sizes, or can that be overcome with variety in larger forms or some such solutions? That's going back to, of course, the tree abstraction, where we're trying to break down the forms of these foliage groupings into roughly spheres. And yeah, to some degree, you do want to have some variety there. Just think about the perspective of it for a second, and think about the fact that, yeah, if you've got a tree here, you might want to emphasize the fact that the sides are receding by the fact that maybe these spheres are getting a little bit smaller. It doesn't actually have to be as extreme, obviously, but it might be worth accentuating a little bit that sort of feel of things. Also, just for interest's sake, it wouldn't hurt to have some variety there of some big ones and some small ones. Usually too much of one thing is not a great thing. So yeah, good question though. All right, sweet, more great stuff. These look really good. Yeah, very, very nice. Yeah, the studies look really good. Really good sense of form. Very, very nice values. Yeah, you did a really good job here of adding in the little fun cracking details and stuff like that without detracting from these big overall forms, which is obviously pretty tough to do. Let's see here. Your studies are looking good. I think. Trying to think exactly how to express this. Your trees don't seem to have quite as the solid sense of values and forms that you get when you're doing your studies. They feel a little bit too formulaic, and not quite as dynamic. And part of that does come from the perspective where you're not utilizing the perspective of your scene nearly enough. Whereas in your studies, I have a very clear sense of the perspective and exactly how these rounded forms are working. In this, it's sort of flattening out. And I really want to see you, when you're doing your applied stuff, make the most of getting that crazy awesome perspective going on in every little rounded form, and then making sure that it's also conforming to our eye line here, and making sure that you've got this clear sense of looking up at this thing and turning this thing into a serious three-dimensional object rather than kind of flattening it out, because you more or less have the right shape of a tree that's interesting, but it doesn't have the right form for the tree. So I'd go back and look at the studies and look really, really closely at the forms that you're making. Same goes for this one, where if you just cut out this, it looks so flat. It has zero sense of the form of it, has zero sense of the perspective of it. If you look just at this, you'd have no idea where the horizon line is. So go back in there and figure that stuff out, because you've got solid sense of perspective here on the ground plane, but as soon as you get to the tree, you lose it. It just sort of vanishes. You don't have that sense of, oh my God, this is super rounded out and super cool and has all this form and stuff. It just kind of flattens out. Same goes even for this. I'm not getting enough of a sense that, okay, if the horizon line's down here, I'm looking up at most of this tree. And based on the perspective here, where it's got a lot receding towards me, as in I can see pretty far down towards my feet, basically, I would be looking pretty far up at this. I'm doing a wide angle lens kind of thing again. So I'd be seeing a lot of the bottom of this tree. So I think your perspective skills are good. It's just you sort of lose track of them when you go from these great foreground ground planes and then move into your objects and your focal points and stuff. You start to lose sight of that. And yeah, I might take a closer look at that. Your rocks are pretty good. Trying to think what exactly the thing is. I think it's, I think maybe you're simplifying them a bit too much. It's almost like you're trying to scatter a few rocks around to make it look interesting rather than trying to have a natural kind of pile of rocks. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. But I think definitely more studies will help, because right now this sort of feels like you wanted to put a rock here, so you put a rock here in the foreground and didn't think like, maybe I could have like another one here that's partly obscured. Well, if there's going to be all these, maybe I'm going to have some more tiny ones. Maybe I can, get out of this shape a bit, add another one over here. Almost as if your rock piles need to be a little bit more interesting. And obviously, just telling someone to make something more interesting is not a great critique, but that's kind of the direction I would say you need to take. Because just take a look at this and see how this rock pile, without a painting to go with it, any background or anything, is interesting. It's very cool. It has all these different sort of rocks. It has all these different directions that things are moving. And then when you get to your own, they feel a little bit more haphazard, that they're just kind of scattered around and they're sort of isolated and not working quite as well as a cohesive whole. So I think I might try to push you in that direction. if that makes sense. But again, very nicely done. These are some fantastic studies, and I think with just the right little tweaks in the right directions, uh, your work could be a whole lot stronger. So yeah, it's looking good. Excited to see what you do next. Right. All right, these look good. There's a few things here that I'm seeing. Uh, Partly, I think you're not quite using enough value range. I think you've got a bit more range in your darks that you're not quite utilizing. That's going to help you push some of these to be a little bit stronger and more dynamic. So you've got some more darks here that you can use to make these pop a bit more. And that'll help you get a touch more form than you've got now. I like what you've done here. This is nicely done. This is a good example of separating out the lights from the darks and making these interesting forms. So I like what you've done here. I think exactly what I'm trying to see here. A lot of it, again, does come down to perspective, that once you moved on to your own piece, it doesn't have a super strong sense of perspective. Like if you just look again at, say, a little corner here, like this ground plane, you can't exactly tell what the perspective is. And if you look anywhere in a painting, you should be able to tell exactly what the perspective is doing. You should be able to tell that, okay, if you set your eye level down here, that all of this thing is looking up at it. And so every little decision you make, every little brushstroke you make, every little tree branch you make is all conforming to that. And you just always, always, always keep that in mind. And you're doing it right in some of these places with some of these rocks here. But I think you could go a little bit further. And again, you've got a bit more value range you can play with. If you're going to go this dark with these trees, it also makes sense that you'd be able to use some of those darks in some of the darker shadows here on your rocks, which is going to tie together your piece as well. So I might use those value ranges in a few more places. I like what you've done here. This is really nicely done. And I might try to bring some of that into your applied study. I don't really get the same sense of light that I think you've got here that you could have in here. Partially that actually comes down to your value range being too tight in a way. Yeah, I think you could actually use a little bit more contrast on this than you've got, because you can still go fairly light and not affect the background. You can still be quite a lot darker than the background, which I think is sort of the concern of being too contrasty, is you don't want to blow your silhouette and mess it up in relation to the background. So I might encourage you to do a little bit more of that. But yeah, looking good overall. Yeah, so a little bit more value range, focus a little bit more on the perspective of things, make sure you're getting that, and keep focusing on always, always, always getting the form of things. That's what this week and this coming week are all about. They're all about nailing forms exactly. You want really dimensional stuff. The world is full of far too many super flat landscape paintings. So we don't want to do any more of those. We want to have stuff that has a lot of form, a lot of dimension. Anything in your painting, you should feel like you can just reach out and grab. So don't ever paint flat stuff. So something to think about. Right. So good. Really like what you're doing with the colors here. So these are nicely observed colors. Cool stuff. All right. So when it comes to your applied study, it's looking pretty good. Um, I think, obviously, without being able to see what studies and stuff you did to get there, the foliage feels a little bit sparse right now, a little bit weak, and that just comes from partially the fact that it's just a sketch, um, and partially the way it's painted. You maybe simplify a little bit more for this stage. Use some bigger brushes for that. I also don't know that the lighting is really reading like you want it to read, because you've got this really warm sort of late afternoon light here, but it's not quite the same as what you've got on this tree here, where it kind of is sort of this murky light that you're not really sure what's happening here. Um, so I might bring some more of that warm light you've got in there onto this tree. For the most part, I like the form of the tree, but here you get a little bit off on what's happening, because don't forget, right, so eye level's down here. That means you're looking up at all of this stuff. So as this form is overlapping in here, remember, you can't see above this. Obviously there's some weird cases where this could kind of twist in there and you could actually see a little bit of it. But for the most part, you're going to be looking up at this. You're going to get a lot more of the bottom of this form and very little of the top. So this is why we go into this stuff, and this is why I harp about perspective all the time, and also why we do all of these form studies, because these are the little things that will definitely set your work on the next level. Because so many people will do these things and completely forget about perspective, and will end up with maybe some pretty decent compositions, but as soon as you start looking at it, you realize that there's no sense of dimensionality to anything in the painting. You realize it's all just flat shapes. Same goes for up here. Again, you're looking up at all of this stuff. So you're gonna have a lot of the underside on these things. Just some slight indications of the top. Always make sure you've got that rounded out form. We know exactly what the form's doing. And then for this part, it's not made super obvious whether, this is this going back right here, is this coming toward this right here. Whatever it happens to be doing, you need to make it obvious what that is. Because if it is ambiguous, it means that you need to go back in and re-clarify things. One other thing I'm seeing here is these rocks, I think, feel just a little bit too contrasty, which is why they're not holding together as well as they should. I feel like these shadow sides would have a bit more fill light in them, would lighten them up just a bit. But overall, really nice. I like what you're doing with your colors. Your colors are really spot on. When you get involved in the colors, you are missing out on just a little bit of contrast. I like what you're doing, but you're missing that ever so important last bit of value range where you get those darks that make everything else pop. Because you can be all pastel-y pretty much everywhere in a piece, but if you just add in a few darks here and there, it'll make everything sing so much better. Like, honestly, that's kind of all you need right there. That's enough dark. You can add more, obviously, but you don't need to add much more than that. Just enough to make everything pop. But nice stuff. All right, look good. My initial impression is that things got a little bit too mushy, which I know is not what you want to hear. You never want to hear you have mushy rocks. Mushy rocks are not good. And that's partially because you got involved a little too far in painting. You got to remember that you've broken down the forms like this, and then at the end of the day, basically you're painting more or less dark here and lighter up here, and that's it. And whereas when you got in here, you started adding some light here and started adding light here and here and here, and the rock started illuminating here and here, and they started getting really bright. And even though maybe your reference did have some of that stuff going on, it's one of those cases where you choose to accentuate certain things and you choose to leave out other things. So even if that is the case, if you just kind of go back to your form and how you've broken it down, and you've broken it down well, so I know you can see the forms, and I know they're there. You just go back in and re-clarify, like, okay, this is where the light is, and that's where the dark is, and ignore for a minute exactly what you're seeing in the reference, and instead get back to, okay, this is what the form is doing, and then let the reference inform some of your decisions with the colors and lighting and stuff like that. But this is your first priority, is making sure that this form feels solid. Let's see here. I got the chat covered. Feels really good. I really like this. I was going to say maybe a little bit more perspective on it, but honestly, it feels pretty solid the whole way up. I'd like to see maybe a little bit more attention paid to how it overlaps or interacts with the ground. You've done a decent job of implying that stuff, but I'd actually render it a little bit tighter, just because you're going to thank yourself for that later. Because understanding how that stuff works is super critical. As I mentioned before, we look at how things interact with each other, and we look at those places where trees and rocks actually touch the ground. Yeah. So particularly with your rocks, I think focusing a little bit more on those chunky three-dimensional forms. You're doing pretty much right here. Again, I think your shadows are getting a little too light again. So tone those down, really make sure that your shadows are shadows, your lights are lights, and then worry about all the fun stuff. Once you get this, you can do all the fun stuff in the world. Knock yourself out. But make sure you've got that first. Then you can go back in, and in that tighter value range, do that. Because even when you did the study of this piece, you went a little bit too far out of the contrasts. I know his contrasts weren't quite that extreme in that many places. They're holding together a little tighter than that. So pay a little bit more attention to that. So look good. It's an awesome tree, by the way. You do a really good job studying it. I like what you're doing with these tree studies. Really strong. I'd say maybe to push it a little bit further for the sake of a study. It's good, but I think you could go even further. There's a lot of information in here, and I'd almost like to see it a bit more. Now, for your rocks, they're not quite getting the same sort of sense of dimensionality. They don't quite have the sense of perspective that I'd like to see. I don't get a sense of the fact that this is a round object, that there's actually a three-dimensional form here, because things are kind of flattening out here, and you're getting into rocks and getting into the crevices and cracks and details a little bit too soon. before you've got a clear idea of it. So you haven't really paid enough attention to the silhouette, for instance, and because of that, it doesn't quite read yet. Um, so spend a little bit more time getting the silhouette right. And then once you've got, almost a two-value rock with almost no details on it, but a good silhouette and good lights and darks, then you can do all the fun little stuff and all the little noodly detail and stuff that you could possibly want. Same goes for this over here. It's not quite reading enough as, planes. Get those shadow shapes clearly defined, get those light shapes clearly defined, and then you can do all the fun stuff. Once you've got it there, you can go in, add the details that show off what exactly the form's doing, add the details that show, what materials are happening here, do all that stuff, but make sure that your shadows are shadows and your lights are lights. But overall, nicely done. I like what you're doing. And yeah, and again, I like the direction this is headed. Whatever you're doing here, I think this is a good direction for you to go. Right. Feel like, let's see here. Even though this is actually quite simplified, it does a good job of showing the form and showing the perspective of this, which is good. Because even in these simple shapes, I can tell that I'm really looking up at all of these. You'd have just enough overlap in there that they're really clearly indicated. You're missing out on a little bit of information here in the tree trunk that I think you could get. I think you can make this a little bit more interesting and show us a little bit more of what this tree is like. Tree trunks can be super interesting, and so I might lose out on a bit of the simplification there and let yourself go wild with really studying the forms. Because this feels far too simplified for I think the direction you want to be headed in. So I might try to study things a little bit more closely and really get some more of the details in there, some more of the individual forms. Because you are heading in the right direction. Again, a little bit more care spent, like if you've got the shadow here, make sure that you've actually got a corresponding thing be casting that shadow. Don't have these stray shapes going out. Take the time to really get in there and show us what's happening here, what the forms are. And yeah, and I'd like to see some more clear rock studies, because clearly you can study something with nice perspective here. So I'd like to see a little bit more clarity in terms of drawing, perhaps even going in with some line drawing and first sketching it out like that. That can be really helpful for figuring out things that you've never painted before and you don't quite understand the forms of yet. If you can sketch it out in lines, lines can be a lot more natural for people and can really help to figure things out initially. All right, it's time for Noah to drink some more coffee. All right, these are looking good. Yeah, nice rocks. Really like the sense of light and bounce light in these. They have a really solid sense of dimensionality to them. Trees are looking good. I feel like there's something. I think that I'm not really sure. figure out exactly what I'm trying to say here. It's almost a case of values that I think your foliage is just too dark. So it's kind of blending in with your tree trunks a bit too much. So I might actually lighten up some of your values to separate the trunk from the foliage. It's kind of a case for all of these that there's actually quite a lot of contrast between, if you look there, between the foliage and the trunk. And I think you're not getting quite enough of that, which is making things flatten out just a bit. Actually, a few more lights thrown in there, I think could help you a lot, particularly in your foliage. Yeah, I think you're a little too conservative with the lights when it comes to the foliage. Try to utilizing just a bit more value range. You can keep them tight still, but you've got a bit more range in there before you even come close to interrupting the sky. And that'll help you flesh out those foliage shapes just a bit more than you are. This is looking good. Your perspective is a little all over the place though. Don't have a great idea of what the perspective's doing, because it's kind of doing a fisheye thing, but I feel like in this extreme of perspective, you're going to be looking up at this stuff a whole lot. This is way up in there. So you're going to be looking up at this tree a whole lot. And if you're going to have the tree that close to the edge, you may as well throw it off the edge of the canvas. You can see a lot more of the bottoms of these tree forms. And goes for these clouds. And then conversely, you're going to see a lot of the tops of these rocks. So these are going to come strongly towards you, because you've got this really strong sense of kind of fisheye perspective. You're seeing up a lot, you're seeing down a lot. So try to utilize that as much as possible. And I think these are sort of partially where you're getting thrown off, because you're not getting this clear sense of light here. Really try to pay attention to the cast shadows that are happening from rocks. Kind of missed out on studying any of that because of the reference you picked. But obviously all these rocks are going to make some interesting cast shadow patterns, whereas you've sort of got just kind of a not sure shadow right now. It'd be good to go in there and just make some clear decisions. Even if you're wrong, if you make clear enough decisions with lighting, it can often act like it's right and is often good enough. And I know that's awful advice for a teacher to give anyone. But honestly, if you fake good lighting well enough, it's often good enough to get by. I might do a couple more tree studies where you're paying a little bit more attention to the bark patterns and really get up and close and personal and figure out exactly how these forms overlap. Tree trunks are weird, and adding a little bit more personality in there would be a nice thing to see. You're doing a good job generally with the shapes and the colors, but a little more of that would help. A little more interesting textures and patterns and stuff like that. So, but overall, really nicely done. Good stuff. Or overachieving traditional painter here. All right, this looks good. I like what you're doing here. It's a nice study. I'm seeing, and I'm not sure why. By and large, trees will always taper. It is very rare that a tree will be certain width and then actually get wider at a certain point. Maybe that's not what's happening. There might be like two different trees here and they might be overlapping, but regardless, it's always a bit odd, even if it is the case, for trees to do that. And if you can avoid it, do so. Not sure what was happening there, but maybe it's a case of the tree form was actually like this, something like that. I'm not sure, but that tends to be how trees work. They tend to always be tapering. They very rarely get wider, and that continues to go until the actual leaves will keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. No branch attaches to another branch and actually gets bigger. So think about that. Doing a pretty good job of actually capturing the perspective, even in these very subtle color modulations. And it's always tricky when you're doing stuff in very few passes. But if you can go in with a smaller brush after the fact and add in some more details in here, it would be nice to see a little bit more, say, modeling on these forms, a little bit more light and shadow. And then also just, again, a few of those indications of, okay, what's the bark doing on these trees? It doesn't have to be much. You can get away with a whole lot. If you've only just got a couple spots where you do show us what the bark is doing, we sort of fill in the rest in our head, and that's about all you need. When you're doing your imaginative stuff, not getting enough of a sense of where the eye level is, for one thing. I keep reading it as different eye levels, and it's confusing me, and I'm not sure. I can't tell if I'm looking at the top of something here or not. There's something not quite right. So, and that's probably just a case of you need to do some more studies, because again, the perspective is reading great here. So when you're making it up, maybe you're not relying enough on firm perspective grids and making sure everything makes complete sense before you dive in with the paint. Because I like what you're doing with the colors and stuff here. They're nicely done. It's just, I think, the drawing stage that could use a bit more attention. But I like what you've done here. This is good. I do wonder if the water was actually that blue. It is almost never that blue. But hey, maybe you're at some glacial lake that is that blue. I just doubt it. Here's a question. Often I feel when making trees, there should be more than just a few, maybe even a forest. Any advice or common pitfalls for approaching forests with few noticeable trees in a painting? Forests are definitely hard because you've got not only to paint a good tree, you've got to paint a lot of good trees, and they all have to interact with one another, feel natural with one another, flow with one another. And yeah, it's certainly very hard. That's part of the reason I try to emphasize focusing on one at a time for now. There's obviously more than enough time to learn how to paint forests. The main thing with forest I see is that if you walk into a forest, you get a sense of depth and space immediately. As soon as you take a picture of that forest, you have no depth and no space whatsoever. Everything completely flattens out in any photograph. So trying to understand the depth and atmospheric perspective in forests is super crucial. And you have to exaggerate that a lot because you don't have the advantage of stereoscopic vision. You just have this flat 2D surface. And so you've got to use all the tricks in the book to make it seem more 3D than it actually is. So I'd say that's probably the most common thing, is that people look at a picture of a forest rather than actually trying to interpret one from reality. All right. Looking good. What are you doing here with the colors? Colors and actually the general effects of lighting are good. I think part of the problem is you're not letting the studies be integrated enough in the environments. So actually, for instance, for this one, when you were doing a study, the fact that this is a green background is super crucial. So when you're doing this imaginative one down here, the fact that it's just got a white background is kind of throwing you off. It's almost impossible to get good values and good lighting, good naturalistic lighting that is, while also trying to have white backgrounds. So I might try to do that a bit more. For this one here, I wasn't getting a super obvious sense of the lights and darks because you have sort of mixed up the two. So you've got, the shadow side of this plane here. And then what you've got on the top here is some cast shadows. But all of those shadows are really going to simplify your values down. It's the light where you're going to get the most strong sense of contrasts. Careful getting too contrasty in your shadows. It can very easily throw off your forms. You also seem to exaggerate a bit too much the silhouettes. Silhouettes are typically a little bit less extreme than people often make them out to be. Usually the angles aren't quite as extreme as we initially see them. It's kind of something that a lot of people will do for quite a long time, honestly. Yeah, most of what I would say for this is simplify things down even more. Don't get too wrapped up in those little detail forms and stuff. Focus on these big overall shapes and try to get those just right. Because that's the main thing. Even though it's got all these crazy lines and textures and colors and cracks and everything going on, that's not the main point of what you're looking at here. The main point is these big shapes of light and dark. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the main thing I'm seeing here. And you've actually done a quite good job of it with this one over here. And to some degree with this as well. This does, again, have a good sense of light, a good sense of color. It'd be just nice to see that you can capture a little bit more of the abstracted form of these rocks. So. These look really good. Really good job breaking things down into the forms. You're doing a great job capturing that stuff. And same goes for the film study. I think your main thing is that studies are all very, very good. And then when you get to your applied stuff, the sense of perspective just goes flying out the window. You really, 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 really need to focus on the perspective of whatever scene you're drawing, because your painting and color skills and even your drawing skills are being held way back by the perspective that you're getting. Because you're studying perspective well, so clearly you can see it and replicate it. But when it comes to your own stuff, you're completely losing that sense of perspective. So if you're, establishing, say, a horizon line here, focus on drawing all of your stuff to conform to that perspective. Make sure that you've got a few indications here that this is going into this. If you've got some going below it, make sure things are wrapping around correctly. As things enter the foreground, make sure that they're receding correctly. If you've got rocks here, make sure they're receding correctly. This tree doesn't make a huge amount of sense perspective-wise, because again, it's sort of flat. So I think that's going to be your main thing kind of moving forward here. I want you to spend extra time perspective on your own apply and making sure as things are going really, really receding. And then making sure that things are coming towards us correctly. Yeah, because I really like what you're doing, and you're studying things really well. It's just the perspective and the drawing side of it that's throwing you off. Because here, there's nothing particularly wrong about what you've painted. The trees are more or less correct, the lighting's more or less correct, the rocks are more or less correct. But the perspective is just making it all sort of weak. You don't have a clear sense of perspective. Whereas look at this. Even though you're looking just down on a little pond scene, there's a very obvious sense of exactly what that perspective is. Same goes for all the pieces you studied. There's a very, very, very obvious sense of just how far away this stuff is. And it's, again, using that sort of telephoto sense of perspective of things being pretty far away, so them sort of flattening out. And then when you're looking at this, they've got more of that fisheye effect where you're really looking down at stuff and you're really looking up at stuff. And you're doing a good job of studying it. Just make sure that you can accurately capture that when you start getting into your own stuff, rather than kind of abstractly flattening things out. So maybe spend a little bit more time almost doing kind of line drawings like this, where you do play with making sure that your perspective is spot on before you have too much fun with all the colors and lighting. Question. No, can you be a little bit more specific about what you mean when I'm over-exaggerating my edges forms? Yeah, just going back for a second here. What I mean by that is that oftentimes when people will see a form, say there's something that has a little exuberance, and they go like that. Okay, so imagine this is your photograph here. When people see that, they're going to almost exaggerate it. So they're going to see this and they're going to exaggerate the form rather than seeing it as pretty mellow. The exact same thing happens when you start to study rocks and stuff. So for instance, you might see that this almost scoops out a little bit. And so oftentimes when people will draw something, they'll over-exaggerate that sense of something sticking out, when really it's actually a pretty darn subtle thing. And the little nooks and crannies and cracks and crevices and changes in angles tend to be a little bit more subtle. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it seems like you have a tendency to over-exaggerate things. For instance, you see here, you've got this extreme bulge out there, when in fact yes, there's a little bit of a sense of that, but it's almost more actually just kind of tapered this way. You've got this hook here where it scoots out, but really it's almost barely noticeable, and is again comprised of some convex forms. So that's kind of what I mean by that. And yeah, I think that was about all. So perspective, perspective, perspective. Whatever you do, do perspective. That is the main thing, because the rest of the stuff you're doing here looks good. You're exactly on the right track here. It's just you lose that sense of perspective, and thus you lose the sense of form. Right. It's looking good. Real quick. Um, right. These look really good. Um, I'm gonna say something looks good that you probably don't want me to say looks really good. Um, your line drawings look quite good, and you need to be doing more of those. When you move into the painting, it flattens out because you're relying on lasso tool and sharp edges everywhere and brush textures and all that. But when you're actually drawing, your drawings have a lot of perspective, a lot of form. Um, but when you do the study of the exact same thing and you start getting in with the brush tools and stuff like that, you start sort of almost half-assing the silhouettes. And when you half-ass the silhouettes like that, they all just flatten out. They all just turn into these kind of bleh forms that are all just kind of pasted on there. And even when it comes to your trees, the drawings have a much stronger sense of form than your paintings do. So now that can come from a lot of different things, but it doesn't mean that you can't paint. It just means that as you're painting, you need to be using more of the information and mindset that's happening in these early stages than in these later stages. Because as you're moving from one stage to the next, you're losing this sense of these really, really, really strong forms. Because again, this further stage back here where you're just doing lines is fantastic. And I want to see more of that. Because I think you get too easily caught up in trying to fake these things, and you're missing out on the opportunity to clearly draw something which, these drawings show me that you can. So that's sort of my high level critique for you. It's really nice to see this stuff, and I want to see a lot more of that. So yeah, overall it's good stuff, but I think the studies, and especially the applied study, suffer from the same problems I was talking about last week, with an over reliance on technical things that detract from the actual form and drawing and landscape study of it. Yeah. So just a few thoughts there. Think about it. Think about how to start bringing in some more of this into your painting work, whether directly or indirectly, making sure you don't lose sight of the good stuff that's happening there. There's a chance that maybe you need to start drawing out and then kind of almost coloring your sketches. There's a chance that will work better for you. All right. These look nice. These look really nice. Very nice. Really good colors. Really, really good sense of colors. There's obviously more colors in the masters than you copied over. It seems like one more pass of colors and you would have gotten it. Like all of these are right, but they're missing just this last little bit of kind of warm orangey light in the canopy here. More than that. Yeah. They're missing that last little pass of light and last little pass of color. And same goes for some of these other ones that it feels like there's just a few more hits of different colors scattered throughout here, maybe a few purples thrown in this tree that you're missing out on. But again, that's kind of nitpicky. Overall, I think these look really nice. These are some fantastic master studies. I love how much form you've got going on here. It's really nice to see. For this, this looks good and has actually quite a good sense of atmospheric perspective. As in, this is kind of what we were talking about just a minute ago of needing to use a lot of perspective to imply depth, needing to fade things back so that we can understand the depth of this forest. I think, yeah, the struggle I'm seeing is with the actual shape of the tree itself. I'm not really buying the tree or the roots or anything like that. I feel like, yes, you got the overall sense of a nice tree, but as far as it comes to the actual forms of it, I feel like you sort of got a little lazy there. So I'd like to see you maybe go in and for an applied study like this, take a little bit more time and figure out what you're trying to do with these forms. Figure out exactly how things are overlapping. Take just a few minutes more and kind of show us, what are these trees like? What kind of, root patterns do they have? How do their forms overlap here? And really get in there and show us all that stuff. Just a little bit more, and even in the foreground here, like let's see what this root looks like. Let's take a little bit of extra time and show what kind of moss is growing on it, even very simply, just to show those shapes. Because right now it was a good thumbnail sketch, but I want to see you push it just a touch further into actually getting into the forms of things rather than just the thumbnail. Let's see you start figuring out how to take the cool stuff you did here and put it right here. Take the cool tree canopies here and figure out how to interact with the sky up here. I want to see this awesome, cool tree with like all the awesome lighting going up in there and start to bring some of that into here. Why can't you have, a little bit of dappled light up here, even hitting some of these branches. I want to see a little bit more of what you're doing really well in your studies brought into your applied study, just to make sure you've got a really firm grasp on it, because you're doing great with the studies, and I want to see that brought into your applied study just a bit more than you're doing. But you're doing great, and you're definitely on the right track here. Right. Oh, more traditional stuff. Always good to see. That's really nice. Great little study. I think you also, like many others today, suffer from the problem of too many concave forms, making things appear a little too cut out. Again, always try to think of things as overlapping convex forms, no matter what. Even these large sweeping angles, try to think about it in terms of, okay, this thing going in here, and then maybe, yes, there is something jutting out there, but generally convex. It helps so that when you do have those very rare concave forms, they really pop out and they really look as sharp and unnatural as they should. I would probably suggest for your rocks, trying to incorporate a few more straight lines in them. I think a little bit more exaggeration of the forms would help you out. So even if they are pretty rounded out, try to push them a little further in the direction of straight, hard lines. This is again going back to that principle of the fact that we're not actually copying what we see necessarily. We're trying to interpret it and show people what we're trying to communicate. If we're trying to communicate something that feels solid and we're trying to communicate form, then we almost want to exaggerate things with some more straight lines so that it's even clearer what we're saying. And it's kind of like, writing an English paper or something like that and chopping out all the extra flowery words so that we can communicate our point a little bit clearer and more forcefully. Yeah, just simplifying things down a little bit and using some more straight lines. This is also something you'll see when people do figurative studies. A lot of people will actually add in a lot more straight lines to a figure even, just to make it appear more solid than it would otherwise. Too many curves in anything will start to make things seem a little too mushy, and you want things to feel like you can hold on to them, then that might help. That's all. Wow. You guys did great this week. I really like what you've done. Lots of good rocks, lots of good trees. And as I said at the beginning of this, the main thing for most people is making sure your perspective is spot on, and then getting back and clarifying those forms as much as possible. I just saw a question. I saw your Art Camp 3 video and thought, then I don't have to master drawing before I start to learn painting. What do you think about that? No, you definitely don't have to master drawing by any means before you start painting. I am a firm believer that they should be taught at the exact same time, that the stuff you learn from one applies to the other, and you should go back and forth and learn both of them simultaneously. So, yeah. I think that's about it. So good work again. You guys did great. I'm super proud of all this stuff. Yeah. So this coming week, we're going to do even more forms, and we should do this next critique actually this coming Wednesday. So it's only a few days away, and then we'll get back on the regular weekly schedule, which I think will be good for everyone. And hopefully I'll get some sleep and get my wrist brace off, so it's a little easier to do paint overs. And yeah, but if you have any more questions, hit me up in the Discord chat, and I'll be in there. But other than that, good luck, and see you guys next time.